You've
You've
moved
got
to
my
that.
better side now.
Hello, good evening, and welcome
Hello,
to the UK
Karen.
Crime Book Club. Even sorry, we've had a few technical issues tonight with the joys of Facebook. So I'm delighted to be joined this evening by Nick, and Nick is here to talk about his new book, The Two Deaths of Ruth Lyle. Which actually it's that way, isn't it? It's always weird when you're on camera, which is set
Yeah.
in my home county of Devon. So we'll talk about more about that in a minute, Nick. But you're the author of another series, the DCI Craig Gillard series, which is set in Surrey.
That's right.
And this one, the Jan Tallentire, is that, I'm saying it right? Tallentire? Is she
Yes,
called?
that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jan Tallentire is at Barnstable, which is just down the road from me in North Devon. Would you like to tell us a little bit about Jan and how she came about?
Yes. Well, Jan Tallentire was actually a minor character in the third book of the Craig Gillard series, which was set in Devon, where Craig had problems with his aunts, who turned out to have criminal bents. And so he went down there, and they rather crossed swords at various times during that. And I thought, I like this character. And I sort of stored her away for a while. And having written 12 of the
Mm,
Gillard's books, I thought that's quite a good time to bring it to an end. Um, there were several reasons for that. One was that the first book was by accident, set in Surrey. There isn't that much competition for detectives set in Surrey, because Surrey is not the most sort of beautiful of counties. It has very many beautiful places in it, but it doesn't sort of grab the imagination like Devon or Cornwall or Northumbria or whatever.
mm.
And then I also got rather stuck in this naming convention, where it was the body in the marsh, then the body on the shore, and I was running out of places to stash them, frankly. Um, one of the major
You
problems
covered
of
all the
writing,
bodies.
yes, and of course, the places that bodies really turn up, like the N25 hard shoulder, not only makes it very difficult to actually have a title, but
Yeah.
also extremely hard for the illustrator. So you run several sort of problems there. And I just
Mm,
thought, well, I've had 12 books. He's developed into a fully rounded character, and I thought it might be time to move on and start somebody new. And then
yeah.
I thought, well, I've got this character already, and I liked her, and I thought, well, this is a good place to sort of join the two series, and so people could go back to the third book and see what she was like in 2 or 3 years before.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I must admit it's definitely sort of piqued my interest. The fact as well that there's 12 other books to read is always, and actually quite a few. When I posted to the group that I was going to be chatting to you, there was quite a few people who said, oh, I love it's my favorite series ever. So
Yeah,
I mean, that's a amazing accolade for, there's so
it
many,
is.
for
It
me,
is.
the favorite series ever is amazing. So was it hard to sort of leave him behind? And has he gone? Obviously, I read the last book. So has he gone for good, or could he come back?
He could come back.
Okay.
He's in the, he has a pretty serious problem in the last book, but it's not a fatal one. So it is
Right.
possible for him to come back, and I'm keeping my options open. Whether it's for a full book about him or as a bit part in Jan Tallentire's series, both of those
Yeah.
things are possible. But I think what I would say to the readers who've enjoyed the Gillard books is the things that make those different, if you like, I'm going to try to
Mm.
preserve in the new book. And that is, I'm always going to try to have an original plot that doesn't, that's just come out of the refrigerator, like quite a lot of thrillers. You say, oh yes, I've read that kind of plot before, or that.
Yeah.
But I always want something original there.
Mm.
And like Gillard, it's very much contemporary crime, using the real techniques that police do in the present day. So there's quite a lot about getting into mobile phones, about automatic number plate recognition, the real techniques used by the police. So in that sense, it's as much continuity as it
Mm.
is change. It's just we have a different detective, and I'm really enjoying the idea of writing a whole series from a woman's perspective.
Yeah.
Uh, it's not. People always say, is it difficult to do that? And of course, I've written many scenes in the previous series which were already from a woman's perspective.
Yeah,
Bard had quite a lot of quite powerful female friends and adversaries, indeed, who had their own point of view. And I have to say that in many ways, Talentire, though she's a woman, is more like me in character than Gillard was. So that's quite
really.
an
Oh,
interesting.
that's
Yes, that really
interesting.
is true. I mean, of course, this is the
Yeah.
thing, that there are many similarities between the sexes
Mm,
in terms of personalities and characters. There are differences, and there is very little which is solely male, and very little which is
yeah,
solely female. Again, just talking in terms of personalities and character types. So, I mean, it's an exercise in the imagination, and I have
yeah,
a very good, very good beta readers and my own wife who are able to keep me on the straight and narrow if I run into difficulty. I mean, one of the
yeah,
classic things at the beginning of the two deaths of Ruth Lyle, Talentire is on a date.
yeah,
First date for a very long time, and she gets called away, as so often happens to busy police officers. And I thought, well, she's going to have to take her makeup down from date type makeup down to going to work makeup. So I sought advice about the
yeah,
quickest and most effective way of doing that. And of course, this is, it's exactly the same kind of technique, but it's much easier to just, turn to my wife and ask rather
yeah.
than if I was trying to research what the inside of the conning tower and the hunt for Red October looked like and try to find someone in the security service who could tell me. So in that respect, it's
Yeah.
not difficult. Not a
It's more
difficult,
accessible, your
more
research. Yeah,
accessible, and it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of
yeah,
fun. I mean, if writing is about exercising your imagination, this is just another opportunity to do it. I mean, I'm sure I would be much more reticent if I was deciding to have a female detective set in the wilds of northern Alaska, hunting down people who were, shooting
yeah.
polar and stealing their skins. I mean, that would be a much more difficult concept altogether. But I think for a woman detective in this country, it's not too much of a stretch.
No, no, I really liked her. I really liked Jan. I thought she was fun and she was feisty and but she's also compassionate and she's got I like that side of her. I thought because sometimes women police officers are written really hard and she has she's tough. She's
Yeah,
tough and she's strong, but she's also she also has another side to her where she wants to she's had a rough time in her personal life and she wants to find love again and I
yeah,
quite like that sort of side of her, the sort of you
yeah,
see it that compared to what she deals with on a daily basis, which we'll come to that in a minute, is quite grim.
yes,
It
yes.
must be very difficult, yeah, to be able to switch that off. So as I said at the beginning, I'm a Devon girl and I'm about 45 minutes away from where the book is set, in Barnstaple, not Ilfracombe. That's probably about an hour. But what sort of inspired you? What inspired you to set? Obviously you said that he came down here, but do you have a sort of connection with Devon at all, or was it
Um,
just
well, I mean, I visited North Devon for holidays quite a bit in my 20s, and I love the sort of rocky cliffs up there.
mm,
It wasn't quite as crowded as South Devon, and it had a wildness about it. And
no?
of course, there's all this history. There's all of this um, escape. There's all the previous books which have been set there, and I think particularly for readers who are abroad, it's quite a lot
Mm,
easier to think back to really beautiful areas of Britain, the coastal areas that they may have been to, than perhaps drag themselves back to the edge of the M25 in Surrey. So I'm sort of looking to. It's a well-worn route, of course. I mean, many very successful crime authors have chosen to set their books in very beautiful parts of the country, and there's a very good reason for doing so.
mm,
But it's also good for me. It gives me an excuse to go down there myself and explore more. And I've already done that numerous times in preparation for this series. And in fact, the difference here, of course, is also that this is planned as a series, and as you're probably aware of, it's the first of an 8-book deal that I signed with
right.
Canello and W.F. Howes at the end of 2022. and that gives me a certain sort of security to know that I can allow some slow moving plots to run in the background, as well as resolving something in each and every book. So I'm thinking of it as something that I couldn't really reliably do with Gillard, where, I mean, you know, obviously you do want to have your main plot resolved within the book so people who read out of order don't get confused. But I didn't really have opportunity to do anything more than just develop his character and those of the supporting characters over that time. But with Talentire, it's much more like can be like a symphony, because I have a few strands which will be developing, sometimes, you know, emerging from the background, sometimes going back, which will then resolve right towards the end of the series. I mean, it's a much more ambitious thing to do, but I have written, you know, copious notes to try and make sure that I can pull it off.
Because I guess that's the thing as well, is with writing a big series of, you know, 12 or 8 books, that sort of keeping that you know, continuity, and remembering, you know, what color eyes they have, what date their birthday's on, you know who they went to school with, and all those sorts of things must be quite a thing to remember. So how do you sort of plan that in your plotting, you know?
Well, it's I have to be really methodical about it, and I have to say my wife Louise helps me a lot, because she runs the continuity file which we keep on Dropbox. So we have folders for each of the characters, and so that I'm not describing somebody who had blue eyes in book 2 as having brown eyes by book 5, or it doesn't take quite so long to check back and find out what color they are. So it's a question of word searching and actually stitching together everything that has been said about this character. And of course, it's relatively easy with Jan herself, because these things are always at the front of your mind. But with more minor characters, you know, you can run into difficulties, and almost the more you round those characters in the early parts of the series, the more checking you have to do when you go back to make sure you've not contradicted yourself. And readers are very clever, you know. Some phenomenal memories. I wish I had them.
I bet they notice.
Yes. I mean, you know, I've been picked up on a number of minor things over the years. One was having a party in a building in Surrey that had actually been destroyed by fire 2 years before. That was quite unfortunate. I did manage to fix that quite quickly, but I had a funeral that took place in Croydon crematorium, and somebody who was in prison was going to get special permission to be able to catch the live feed from the crematorium, which of course is pretty normal these days. And I got a message from the celebrant at Croydon crematorium who said she really enjoyed my books, but in fact she had to point out that Croydon was one of the few crematoria that didn't actually allow or didn't have sufficiently technical enablement of this technique. So I thought, well, okay, as errors go, that's one that's very hard to avoid. But I mean, trying to get things right is something I take very seriously. If you're writing contemporary fiction and you're telling people using up-to-date techniques, then you really do need to make sure that you are on top of them. So
I imagine I think people are, and particularly, I mean, in contemporary and historical, people are very keen to point out, if you, I'm sure in a very helpful way, that if you you know, you get your date wrong, or, you know, like you say, you have that you know, and I guess that would be helpful if before you edited it and it was on the shelf, rather than afterwards, when there's not much you can do about it.
No, it's sort of the iron law of publishing, isn't it? That mistakes are only discovered when the first paperback edition has gone to the printers. I mean, they're never discovered, you know, when you've just got the Kindle up and you can you can get that
just change it.
Relatively, you know, very, very few, but I take them all very seriously, and I really appreciate readers who read that closely, because that's part of enjoying the book. I wouldn't put in the details if I didn't expect people to read them very closely. So
so the 2 deaths of Ruth Lyle, would you like to sort of give us a bit of an overview of the book and what happens?
Yes.
I know, without spoilers, obviously, because we want people to read it.
Yeah, I mean, the book starts with Talentire called away from a date to somebody who she was a mentor to, a young officer in. She's in close to Barnstaple on her date, and she's called away to Ilfracombe, about 20 minutes drive north. When they're very strung out. I mean, this is actually totally accurate for Devon and Cornwall police. They're very strung out. They have very few resources. It's an enormous area and very slow to get around. And so even though she's not on duty, she agrees to come in and help this young man because he's discovered a body, a woman apparently in her 60s, impaled on a crucifix in an Airbnb. And this is a historic Airbnb, apparently. Anyway, so they've gone in there, and so she says that, you know, she discovers that the only assistance to this constable is another even more inexperienced officer. So she rushes over there and finds, you know, a fairly grisly scene, the woman clearly dead for some time, and the crime scene where, you know, there's quite a lot of blood and so forth. So she manages to get the identification done pretty quickly, takes lots of photographs, finds a handbag. She says, that's great. Handbag's got a passport in, it's got bank cards, and it gives the name of the woman's Ruth Lyle. And so she goes, okay, well, we've done something here. She secures the scene, and then finally the local uniformed inspector turns up, and she says, well, we managed to we made a good start, and you know, we know that this is Ruth Lyle. She's 66 years old, and you know, at least we know something about her. And the inspector, who's a bit of a kind of a long-serving officer, says, you must be joking. Ruth Lyle? Well, she was killed here in 1973. And Talentire says, what? And she said, it's the most famous crime, he says, the most famous crime in Ilfracombe history. Ruth Lyle was stabbed with a crucifix. And then they just start comparing notes and say, well, this is not possible. And Talentire says, well, look, I've got a birth certificate here. And everything that they have, every piece of documentary evidence, is as if the woman, the young girl of 16 who was stabbed to death in that time, had not died. And then they think, well, it must be some kind of coincidence. But then they discover that actually the disused church in which the young Ruth Lyle was killed in is actually the same address as this Airbnb. And it goes on from there with coincidences, which obviously can't be coincidences. So the story is, well, if this is the real Ruth Lyle, who's in her grave? Who did they bury back in 1973? And how could we be sure? There was no DNA testing done then, and it was more than a decade ahead of any before any testing was done. And so they've got a big investigatory scene on their hand. So the whole story of this book is that it's what's completely different about it. It's the only book I've ever written where I started from the title. I wanted to have a high concept title that would bring questions into people's minds right from the beginning. And I mean, this is what, you know, publishers say, oh God, can you get us a really good sellable title, something that will, you know, where you don't have to even ask them to read the blurb, that they want to pick up the book on that. So I came up with this, and then just a few months after I was, you know, started writing it up and pitching it to Canello, then what should happen but Richard Osman should come out with The Man Who Died Twice. And I thought, oh. So I read enough of his book to realize that it's actually a very different book. And of course, his is cozy crime anyway, and mine is definitely not.
Not cozy,
yeah, and you know, different readerships, some overlapping, of course. But anyway, I think that the title is a really good way to start the series. I mean,
definitely.
High concept titles don't fall off trees. There are relatively few of them that you come up with. And so having done this, I then thought, how could I then flesh this out in a way that doesn't betray the question that I've raised in people's minds? So I worked really hard on that, and had 3 or 4 different possibilities, and I selected the one that seemed to work best. And then all sorts of other things started to fall into place. And as often happens, I mean, this idea is so important in all fiction, but particularly in crime fiction, as you tighten the relationship between characters. They might not just have met each other in the present day, but met each other in different roles in the past, and you have this chain, this sort of kaleidoscope of different changes between them. And so I've employed that as much as I could in that book to try to bring a set of characters who are one thing in the present day and something else in the past together, with all of the contradictions that entails.
Yeah, I think I think the book tackles some quite difficult things, and actually very reminiscent of living in Devon. You know, the sort of the racism, the misogyny. You know, very you know, small village, small town. You know, it's unfortunately Devon, as beautiful it is has not, you know, in some areas hasn't maybe caught up as much as other places. And I thought that was really interesting that you'd brought that in, because actually I imagine that is very, you know, it's probably in well, as we know from the press and things, you know, is in the police force. So was that something that you wanted, was important to you to bring in?
Yes. I mean, if you're writing about contemporary policing from a female perspective, it's never far away.
No.
And you know, the stories that female officers, former officers, have told absolutely beg a belief about what happens in the police. And you know, by writing this book, I'm not attempting to say that the real Devon and Cornwall police has anything quite like this. But it will be a recurrent theme in varying intensities throughout the book, that Jan's battles will not just be against criminals, but they will be within the police force, again, having problems with individual officers and indeed the whole hierarchy and the way in which it's run. And I mean, if anything, you know, they're somewhat milder than some of the things that I've read about that really happen. And if I were to put those as secondary plots in the novel, it would rather overshadow the main plot. So you've got to be very careful about how big these plots are going to be. So
no,
I really enjoyed doing that.
I thought it was really interesting, and I think sometimes, you know, it can be shied away from because but I think, like you said, if you're going to write contemporary, then you need to show it all, warts and all, don't you, really? And is that something that comes up in your research? Because obviously there is, you know, a big element of police procedural in it. So how do you sort of research that? Because your background isn't policing, is it? So
no, but my background was as a journalist, so researching rapidly indeed does come to that. So I'm not shy to pick up the phone. I do have a couple of really good police sources, one of whom has not only he's been in special branch, he's been to Cobra committee meetings. There's almost no aspect of policing that I can't find out about by asking him a few questions. And I also have one or two who are current officers who are able to help me on the things that are just happening at the moment. But a lot of the time, you know, you just keep your eye open to what's happening in the press. So, for example, it doesn't occur in this book, but I sort of get ahead of what's actually happening, and I think, well, what would the police really be like to do now? So it was a few books ago, and I thought I invented something called Gait Analyzer, which was the response to the fact that on CCTV, people, you know, criminals always put their hoods up, and a lot of other people put their hoods up as well. So faces can't be seen on CCTV. And so, well, what else is there unique that can be tracked by that? And I thought, well, people's gaits are unique to them, and we know that we recognise people, even members of our own family. You can tell them even several hundred yards from the way they walk. Even wearing, you know, different clothing. And I thought, I'm sure, you know, actually I started on this in about 2010, writing this up. I wrote Heartbreaker, my terrorism thriller, and I imagined that a beta version of that would be used at Heathrow Airport. And anyway, so a couple of years down the line, I discovered that it actually did exist, and work had been done on the quiet for quite a long time. And so, and of course, by now I'm pretty sure that every piece of CCTV is being used by artificial intelligence, being fed into the beta versions of gait analyzers to see if they can you know, identify.
Identify people by their walk, and that's amazing.
Exactly. So
That's
there's
so
a few
true, 'cause
times.
you get used to, even at work, you hear people walking down the corridor and you can hear
Yes.
that it's
Yes.
certain people because of, like you say, their walk. So obviously you can't hear that on CCTV, but you can, you can see it. So that's really
That's right.
interesting.
Yeah,
So,
all that stuff. I mean, I love all that stuff, and that's where the
mm,
journalism comes through. And quite often I can't find out about the very most current techniques that the police are using. And
yeah,
Devon and Cornwall police are quite keep matters fairly close to their chest on exactly what their new techniques are. But you can, in the press, there is so much about
mm,
what's happening, and it's fairly easy to sort of work out what direction they're heading in. And of course, this is the process of imagination and invention.
yeah,
You can see where things are going, and build on that. So not all of the policing tools that I put in the books do I know actually exist yet, but
no,
I know
they
the
might do one
short
day.
will very soon. Yeah.
And has that changed in the years that you've been writing? Has that been I guess like you said, you read a lot and you keep up to date with things, but has it changed dramatically in the years that you've been writing?
With the actual techniques that the police are using.
Yeah.
No, well, yes. I mean, I suppose the thing that's changed most. I mean, we were, even from the moment I started writing, the interrogation of mobile phones was probably the biggest single drain on police time. That
Mm,
and CCTV. Now, I think probably within the next couple of years, CCTV won't be looked through by individual officers, fast forwarding, it'll do endless hours of Laurel and Hardy, which is what it looks
yeah.
like, and scurrying across platforms. It'll be
Yeah.
done by artificial intelligence. So they will be able to look through tens of thousands of hours of CCTV looking for the same person very,
Yeah.
very quickly. So I think that's one of the things that's happening, beginning to
Yeah.
happen now. Mobile phone interrogation has become a lot easier. There are now these portable terminals, kiosks, they're called SSO kiosks, where you can take the SIM card from the phone and just pop it in to the machine, and it will strip out all of the data that is stored on it. So the old system, which 10 years ago, you would have to get a warrant to the mobile phone operator and
And get the
say, I
records.
need all the data that you have on your servers about this
Mm,
number. And now it's a great deal quicker. I mean, it doesn't remove all the problems, of course. Not everything is
yeah.
on the SIM card, and I don't try to go into too many technical details because you can overburden the narrative
Yeah.
by doing. But I do want to give people the impression that technology is moving on.
Yeah.
And in fact, in the next book in the series, I think it's probably all right to talk about that. It won't come out till November. It's going to be called The Last Ride. And in that, I focus on cars. Now, cars are computers on wheels, and we have
Mm,
a bunch of joyriders in Cornwall who managed to steal a keyless car. We read about that happening quite a lot, and crash it at very high speed. And a great deal of the detective work that takes place around the crash is in terms of finding out from the car what it had already sent to the servers back in Germany where the Mercedes
wow.
was built.
Yeah.
And so it's a completely new area of detective work that's going on. I'm not aware, I mean, I could be wrong, but I'm not aware of many other thriller writers working on that kind of material. So one of
No.
the things I'm always trying to do is to show people a little bit more about our surveillance society,
Mm,
about changing, and ask them the question, are you happy with this?
yeah.
And we see how it's deployed in detecting crime and preventing crime and so on, but what kind of loss of liberties do we have when our cars are already always telling somebody in another country, oh yes, he's in the shopping centre at Woking at the moment, and
Yeah.
the rear door opened 3 seconds ago and the front passenger isn't wearing a seatbelt.
Yeah. Now I was really surprised because a friend of mine's got a Mercedes and she was just saying last week that it had a tracker on it, and she didn't know it until I think she went to the garage, and the garage said, "Oh, yeah, we can see where you are, or we can find out where
Yeah,
you are." And she was like, she had no idea.
yeah.
Um, So she said, like in some ways it's good, they say it's because they, they can keep you safe, and they can find where you are if you were to go missing. But also, yeah, it does have that element of another bit of Big Brother about it, doesn't it?
Well,
So
it does. I mean, of
yeah,
course, the thing is that you might buy the new car and not bother to set up the app on your phone or whatever to get the tracker so that you can use
yeah,
its attributes, but it doesn't mean to say the tracker's not working in the background anyway. And
exactly,
that's true
yeah,
of many of the things, both in our phones and in cars and many other
yeah,
devices, which will, they're still working with the manufacturers, even if you're not actually accessing the data.
yeah. You're not using it yourself; they are.
Yeah. But I don't want to
Did
give the
you?
impression that the books are all about, geeky stuff.
No,
There's
no,
still
not at all. Because
very
actually,
human stories at the centre of this.
what I was
Uh,
going to talk about was the actually what I really liked about it is the sort of historical aspects in the book. So the crucifix, actually,
yes,
and I was really fascinated with that side, because you go into real detail about the murder weapon, and generally that's because what murder weapon isn't a crucifix, which has got a very, very long history going back. It sometimes a bread knife doesn't really have the same sort of effect. So how did that sort
no.
of come about?
Yeah, I mean, I thought that it would be just really interesting to look at the pedigree of the weapon and to make the weapon a character in its own right.
Mm,
And uh, I did some research on the Crusades, and also about corrosion of metals. I didn't put all of it in the book, to be honest. It was probably long enough as it was, but it was about the way in which historic either weaponry or tools can tell you a lot about where they were made and how they were
mm,
used and so on. And to give this crucifix its history going back to the Crusades, and how it was somebody with the same name as the murder victim, who,
yeah,
an aristocratic version, who originally picked up this
yeah,
this weapon 1,000 years before, and it gave it a kind of a new dimension back into
mm,
history without making it a historical novel. And of course, I gave the opportunity for one of the officers involved to become thoroughly obsessed with this, even beyond, its relevance to the crime. And he said, "Oh,
yeah,
yes, and it could actually have been made from the nails from the one true cross." And
yeah,
so, yeah, you're getting a whole different area going on there. And I did really enjoy that. And I know that it sort of gives an integrity to the plot. And we say, well, there's,
yeah.
you know, not doesn't this plot doesn't just go back 50 years, it goes back 1,000 years.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah, no, I really liked it. I
yeah,
really like that
yeah,
part of it, because, and I also like the sort of the interest that it, the sort of the vicar comes in and wants to have a look at it, and that
yeah,
everybody's like forgetting that it's actually, killed two people. Um
yeah,
it's like, or is it the same weapon, and how could it be the same weapon? And there's so many questions that you go along and you think, well, it can't be, because it's been in storage, obviously. It's been
yeah,
kept safe by the police all
yeah,
these years. But then you find out
yes,
that maybe it wasn't kept so safe, because
yeah,
actually they needed space. So they may have
yeah.
got rid of it.
Yeah, I mean, that's
So,
another thing, of course, about police resources, that eventually they have to empty their cupboards and
mm,
cabinets and all the evidence. I mean, I've been to see a police evidence storage area. I probably wasn't supposed to. I was allowed to see one, and it's remarkable. It's like a warehouse, and there are things which
mm,
are kept there for years. Some really quite large pieces of evidence, just in
yeah.
case there's a possibility of an appeal.
Mm.
Um, this might need to be paraded around a courtroom again, and the resourcing involved to do that is quite large.
Yeah, imagine if you think about all the crimes that happen, and then the fact they've got to keep, even if they kept one little bit, but if obviously if it's a murder, there's a lot of evidence that is kept.
Yeah, yeah,
Or sort of crimes that sort of have lots of different elements to it. Yeah, that must be massive.
yeah, yeah. It is, and the keeping tabs on where everything is,
Mm,
and so on is quite difficult. There'll always be, in each case, there'll always be an officer designated as the evidence officer who's
yeah.
responsible for making sure it's stored safely, and there'll also be an officer police secure storage to look after things like cars, for example, a car seized after a car chase, in which possibly someone chased by the police dies, and they know they have to hold on to the car because there's going to be a police complaint go on, and then there'll be forensic accident investigators involved. I mean, in a novel, you can only really scratch the surface of the complexities of what will happen, but I do allude to them to just show how difficult policing has become. And people are very critical of the police, but they have to do a lot more now than they ever had to do in the past in terms of preparing for future events like appeals or investigations by police complaints authorities.
Yeah, and I guess as well, because there's so many different crimes that can be committed now. I mean, obviously, there's always been murder, there's always been, various different sort of things, but there's so many different crimes now with cybercrime and all the crimes that come from the technology that we use now.
Yes.
That's that must be a completely different type of policing to the sort of people who did it 30, 40 years ago. It must be completely unrecognizable to them.
That's right. I mean, in one of the Gillard books, The Body in the Shadows, I did dip a little bit into cybercrime. Won't say too much about it, but it that book was again, as I say, always trying to be original. That was a where done it, where I right from the beginning, the police knew who the criminals were involved. They were planning a big big heist, £500 million, huge, and they were thinking, well, we can see who's involved, what it might be, but where is it? We don't have the intelligence of that. They had an undercover officer who's in contact with some of them in the right pubs and so on, trying to overhear things. So you knew the people, but where was this is going to happen? And I tried to make it a real twist where the actual crime took place, and then took that into an area which I think a lot of people surprised by. In fact, my police source said he thought it was a brilliant idea to make that particular location for the crime. So all the time, I was trying to do something that's a little bit different in each of the books. So it keeps me busy.
Yeah, no, I imagine it does, because I was really interested as well in the sort of the complexities, because there are, the book does take you down lots of different avenues of where it might end up, and where it does end up, which we're not going to give spoilers. But how, are you a plotter? Are you did you know when you started that this was how it's going to end, or is it much more of a sort of a progressive process for you?
No, I am a plotter. I'm not a pantser.
You're not a pantser.
I know when I start. I mean, I have 3, 4, sometimes even 5 books going in my head at the same time, and I was writing notes on all of them. But they're like airliners circling Heathrow waiting to land, and I know how each of those books ends. In many cases, because it's the twist which leads to the ending, which is the thing I thought of first, and I build the rest of the book around it. And as I say, the 2 Deaths of Ruth Lyle was different, because on that occasion I did start from the title and then work the rest of the book from there. But mostly, I'm looking at something and saying, this is what we'd expect with this kind of crime, and how can I twist it so that people wouldn't expect what's going to happen. So I do know in almost all cases who committed the crime. Occasionally, I have got sort of 3/4 of the way through and had a better idea. I've only done that on a couple of books. And I think sometimes when you're reading a book, you can tell the pantsers, because there's a certain haziness about what happens in the last 10-15%. And I think, some really good writers, they can get around that. But occasionally when I'm reading it, I think, you didn't write this knowing what's going to happen at the end. And of course, if you do, if you don't, and then you make these certain changes that you need to at the end of the book to make it all work together, you then have to go back to the beginning and make some changes that either because you've got to give the reader some possibility of a
Oh
hint.
yeah, definitely.
Can't be a character introduced 85% of the way or 90% of the way through the book who did the killing. It's got to be somebody who's at least there in the background early on.
Yeah.
Just to give the readers a fighting chance. So yeah, I mean, I'm definitely a plotter, and it's the plotting that really, really enthuses me, and I'm always coming up with new plot ideas. But I mean, with this series, I have really made a huge effort to make sure that the characters are fully rounded, because it's one thing having a great plot, but you have to have really good secondary characters as well. And with Maddie
I like
Moran,
Maddie. Yeah.
a really good secondary character, and also Dave Nuttall
Yeah.
and indeed Primrose. So
Yeah. Primrose, yeah.
the idea is having characters who contrast from each other. They're fully rounded, and there'll be times in the book where we delve a little bit more into each of their lives, or sort of to bring some more issues out about them. Because you don't want to be reading about DNA tests all the time. You don't want to be reading about automatic number plate cameras. There's good, but it's a human story. You always want to have a story of human beings in conflict, and how is it resolved. And that's what I've tried to do.
Because I think it must be, a real challenge. You said about like coming up with new ideas and new plots, and it sounds like you don't have an issue with that if you've got sort of quite a few going on in your head at the same time. But just that sort of, when you started your other series and you started this series, do you know what's going to happen? Do you think where it's going to end, or is that more of a process as you go through?
Well, I'm planning. It's that well planned for DI Talentire that I know how the end of book 12 will finish.
Wow.
So there's as I say, I did hint that there's an underlying plot that runs through the entire series, and I'm planning to go for 12. As I say, I'm only contracted for 8. But if I get to 12, I know exactly what's going to happen there, and it is related to what in some parts of the book is a secondary plot. But I know who's involved with that, and the surprise I think it will cause. And so I'm, already enjoying that. But I'm already trying to find room in books 3 and 4 and 5 for the relevant parts of this secondary plot to appear without overshadowing the main plot, and also without being so salient that people feel that they have to read them in a certain order.
Yeah, because that is nice to be able to.
It's quite a hard balancing act, to be honest.
Yeah, it's nice to be able to pick one up. If you haven't read all of them, but then be able to go back and start if you start at book 3, or and you go back and do 1 and 2, or you can start where you're supposed to and read them all the way through. Who sort of inspired you to write, with sort of, because your journalism background isn't in sort of it's more sort of financial, isn't it? So
it was originally, and my inspiration hasn't really been from other writers, though I do, I used to read Graham Greene. I was very impressed. I read all when I was younger. I haven't read all the classics, for example, but I have read, a lot of Graham Greene, and many, Nikki French, for example. I thought she, although I understand it's two people.
It's they're both, yes, husband and wife. Nikki and Sean,
and very impressed by their work, and but really the inspiration has come from things that I have stumbled across. Either in my first big inspiration was Bite, which was my UK #1 bestseller, a pandemic long before the pandemic, and which I managed to maneuver to #1 in the UK without ever having a publisher. So
that's amazing.
Which was luck. I mean, I'll tell you how I did it. And again, I didn't when I wrote it. I've discovered that when you put it onto the self-publishing platform on Kindle, you can it was only one word title, and I actually found that I had my room to put the strap line, which was the most gripping thriller you'll ever read, which I'd had ever since I'd self-published it as a paperback. Thinking, well, no one will ever know this book anyway, so why not have a really so, but I found it fitted into the end of the title, so it became like an endorsement. And back in 2014, that was allowed on Amazon. It's not allowed anymore.
Stopped it.
But people did it. Apparently, I spoke to a chap from Bookature at the 2016 London Book Fair, and he said, "Oh, I've been looking forward to meeting you. You were the first person to do that." And he said, "Oh, it was very clever." And he was convinced that that was the reason that it got to #1. And it's certainly true that the moment, well, certainly when I cut the price to 99 pence, which I'd been advised to do by people who knew more about these things than I did, and then it just whizzed up the bestseller lists. But the inspiration for that book was while working at Reuters, attending a medical conference in Amsterdam in 1991. And this was all about tropical diseases. And I was really shocked to see that I was the only international journalist attending this conference, given that malaria alone killed 2 million people a year at that time. But the previous week there'd been the AIDS conference, and at that time AIDS was obviously a rising source of concern. It was killing about 20,000 people a year, but almost exclusively, or that's what we thought at the time, almost exclusively in the first world. That was packed list, and of course, they should go there. It's very, very important. But I had all this time with professors of parasitology and so on, and saying, look, people are dying in Africa because they cannot afford even the livestock drugs like ivermectin, which will kill parasites. Cattle, they can't afford those, and they would kill the parasites in people. And as I say, 2 million people a year at that time were dying from malaria. This is before Bill Gates did his big push into trying to get a vaccine for malaria. And I just thought, well, I read my articles for Reuters, and they were very well received, and so on. But I thought this is worthy of a book, I think. And it started running around in my head for quite a long time after that, and that was the inspiration, I think. And then I had a couple of other ideas, and I started jotting things down. Like many journalists, the idea is always at some stage to get for a less demanding deadline. One deadline a year instead of one. Well, with Reuters, I had three. Sometimes I had 3 or 4 deadlines a day, and you had to get your articles out to the second. I mean, we were timed in our financial headlines to the second against the competition, and that's serious pressure. So I mean, I loved it, but it was nice to move on to something. So I've got 2 deadlines a year now, which some people think, oh God, you write 2 books every year, and I think that's not bad. It's not bad compared to.
I guess it's just what you're used to, isn't it? I was talking to another author the other day, and she writes 2 a year, and and it's for some authors that is a lot. Some authors write 1 a year, don't they? And so and some write less than that. But I guess it's what works for you. If you can do 2 a year and you enjoy it and it's comfortable, then that's good.
Yeah, I mean, I have more ideas than 2 books a year.
You have time for.
Yeah, I mean, I use dictation software, so I write quite fast, and that really helps. And I did do 3 books one year when I did a standalone called Trapped at the same time as I did 2 of the Gillard books. And that was probably too much. And of course, the great danger is, of course, that if you are trying to do too many books at once, that the quality may suffer. And also, you have to guard against that. Every book must be absolutely as good as you can make it. And you need the time within the editorial and publishing process to be able to say, I realize I've given it to my editor, but I need it back because I actually want to change the scene. I've been thinking about it. And of course, that's terribly annoying to them. It's terrible. It's going to the printers in 4 weeks. Does it really need to? I mean, there's still changes that I probably would make to my very first Gillard thriller, The Body in the Marsh, but that's long down the road now, so I'm stuck with it. The funny thing is, editors say, well, is the book finished? Well, in a sense, the books are never finished because I don't ever stop thinking about them, thinking how I could still improve them. And I realise this is a futile waste of brain power to be thinking about books that are out there. But it does show that, you know, I'm never quite finished with them.
Never quite finished.
Yeah.
I'm just looking at the time, and we're coming up to the end of the hour. But
Yes.
so do you? What do you like to read in your spare time, if you have any?
Well, my great confession is that apart from the non-fiction that I have to read in terms of researching the book, I just am not getting through. I really need to read most of my competitors, and I do try. And there are some great books out there.
Mm-hmm.
But often, by the time I get to the stage when I put down my own work and I come and sit and relax and breathe deeply and do a few Pilates exercises, say, okay, the day's done, pick up a book, 15 minutes, I'm asleep. 4:30. Oh, it's terrible. You know, it must be my age, I suppose. But so I'd really love to give you a comprehensive answer, and one of those. Oh, on my coffee table at the moment, there's this incredibly brilliant book, and there's this one on my bedside, and I'm also reading this. I've got two or three picked randomly from the shelf on the go, and put one of them down for a month, and I can't remember what's happened in it. I've become a terrible reader as a result of.
You haven't got time.
Be a better writer.
Yeah, well, that's good. I said that doesn't, you know, that's good for being honest, because you know, I must admit I do read. I have to read a lot for my blogging and for interviews and things. Which I enjoy, but I have to read in the day, because if I read at night, I'm exactly the same. I'll sort of I'm going to go to bed and read, and then I read about 4 pages, and then that's it.
Yes. Yeah, and it's a shame, because, you know, I love reading. I mean, you know, this is the whole reason that I'm a writer, is that I love reading, and I'm inspired when I read. Some of my rivals write beautiful books, wonderful. And I think, oh yes, and it makes me want to go back and think about my own work and so on. So yeah, that is well, that's the price I'm paying at the moment for for the work output I have. But there is one final thing that certainly before we finish that I want to mention, is that, you know, as I mentioned, Jan Talentire is based in Devon, and I will be going down on a book tour. For any of the people listening in and watching in at the moment, I'm going to be in the week of the 13th of May. I'll be visiting pretty much every bookshop in Devon, either just to drop in and say hello, or in some cases to do a bit of a signing from stock and so forth. And I'll be flitting around from one to the other. I'm put together a kind of itinerary for this, and I'm going to be trying to publicize it nearer the time. So if anybody, including you, Karen, I hope to run you there. If you're around, then it'd be great to meet you, and I'm always happy to talk about anything about how I write books and so on. And also, to talk about the delights of Devon and Cornwall. In fact, Talentire will be spending a fair amount of time in Cornwall.
Well, there's a lot of what happened. Yeah, well, that's the thing with Devon and Cornwall Police, isn't it? Is that is what it is.
That's right. If you're the overnight detective inspector in Barnstaple, you can be expected to go as far as Penzance if they really need you. I mean, they do have detective constables down there, but in theory, you could, you know, travel that far. I mean, it's a very demanding area for, particularly for detectives, because they don't have enough. They have to travel huge distances, and they're constantly on the road, stretched out. So, yeah. Well, so it gives me an excuse to write about beautiful Cornwall as well as beautiful Devon.
Definitely, and also Devon and Cornwall both have their sort of their bleak areas, you know, of sort of, you know, I'm thinking of like the North Cornish coast in the winter is beautiful, but it is also very bleak and quite deserted. As well as a lot of North Devon is in the summer. It's absolutely you know, packed, but actually it's a very different story in the winter.
That's right.
So I know. Yes. So what I'll do is I'll post the link to your book, to this great book.
Thank you very much for that, Karen.
And actually that way, I keep going the wrong way. Is out.
Is my version.
So Nick's going to be out and about. So when is the book out? I can't remember. I did write down
the book. Launched today.
It's today, yeah. So it is due. I thought it was today.
Yeah.
So it's out today. So that's available from all the independents and the usual
Yes, usual bookshops.
usual online
And
bookshops.
of course, the audiobook is available with the
Ah,
fantastic
right.
narration by Mandy Watson.
Oh, brilliant.
And yeah, she's very, very good. And
Yeah.
I mean, the audiobooks of my books have gone very well. And
Mm,
because Marston York narrated the Gillard series, and a lot of people
mm.
love his voice. And I think everyone who liked his voice is going to love Mandy Watson as well, because she is really good.
Yeah,
And
it
I would,
definitely
I would
makes.
say that all the different versions are going to be out there. Yeah, I'll just say take a look.
Yeah, no,
And
thank you for joining us. It's been a great,
oh,
and
thank you, Karen. It's been great to talk to the UK Crime Book Club.
yeah, thank you, and thanks everybody for watching. Thank you for Kaz for rescuing us at the last minute.
Yes,
Much
definitely.
appreciated. And yeah, we'll see you all soon.